Imagine you're riding in a Jeep heading across the savannah. Surrounding you are the sounds of elephants. You see a variety of amazing megafauna, including zebras, giraffes. But suddenly your driver slams his brakes. In the road in front of you is a massive creature laying on its side. You can't tell what it is. The driver jumps out and runs in the direction of the creature, ignoring all the animals surrounding him. You shout from your vehicle, "What is it? What is it?" He turns to you with a tear in his eye and he says, "A Northern White Rhino." What's up, everybody? Sorry for that super sad beginning to this Mythic Wilds podcast. Today we're going to be talking about a very recent living legend, Sudan, the last white rhino. But before we get into that, we actually have a listener question. This listener question comes from my Discord server. Again, if you'd like to submit your own questions, join us over on Patreon or on Discord. And it comes from Big E. Big E asks, do cultures across the world have their own version of shadow people, or is that phenomenon unique to modern folklore? Now, this is a podcast where we do discuss cryptids and stuff like that, especially if they're animals, but I will indulge this question right here, especially because this is one of my friends from high school. So, first of all, what are shadow people? Shadow people are dark, human-shaped figures, and they're usually seen in the peripheral vision or during sleep paralysis. And honestly, the answer is yes, other cultures do have shadowy beings. For example, in Islamic folklore, there are the jinn, and these are beings who existed in a parallel world. In Japanese folklore, there's the kageona, or the shadow woman, and this appears as a shadow, even though there's not going to be people around creating that shadow. In Irish folklore, there's something called the slough, which are the undead spirits of wicked individuals banished from the afterlife. So in answer to your question, Big E, pretty much every culture has some version of shadow people, and this folklore and these legends, and even in some cases, religion and sacredness, has persisted for thousands of years. Really great question. Again, if you want to submit your own, let me know over on Discord or Patreon. Thank you, Big E, for that question. And on that happy note, again, let's get into our creature intro. Sudan was the last male northern white rhino. He spent most of his life in a safari park called Dvůr Králové in the Czech Republic from 1975 to 2009 to be exact. It's also important to note that northern white rhinos are a subspecies of the white rhino, and that there's also the southern white rhino, which are different than the northern white rhino, but they're in the same genus. They're the same species. Now, the northern white rhino had been struggling for decades because primarily of poaching, and the populations dwindled, especially in the wild, and people started working desperately to save this species. But roadblock after roadblock stood in their way. Sudan was born in Shambe, South Sudan in February 1975. He was one of 6 northern white rhinoceroses which were captured at the time, and the population was already dropping considerably, being around 700 individuals. Their captors were none other than Chipperfield's circus. This was an English circus and one of the largest in Europe at the time, who also opened a variety of safari parks in the 70s. Their employer was Josef Wagner, the director of the Dvůr Králové Zoo in Czechoslovakia, which is now known as the Czech Republic. This action got a ton of criticism from most experts because they believed that leaving the animals in the wild was the only way to preserve the species. The white rhinos that were captured included 2 males, which were Sudan and Saut, and 4 females being Nola, Nuri, Nadi, and Nasari. The Dvůr Králové Zoo was a 100-acre establishment in Dvůr Králové nad Labem, Czech Republic. I'm so sorry, I'm probably butchering a lot of this language here. It was the second largest zoo in the country, and it was famous for one thing, its open safari. The mission of the zoo was to protect endangered and threatened wildlife from extinction. It was established in 1946 and resulted in 3,000 animals being imported to Czechoslovakia from East Africa specifically. Some of these animals were distributed across Europe, but most stayed at this zoo. They created the largest herds of antelopes, zebras, giraffes, buffaloes, and rhinos outside of Africa. In fact, we'll get into this in a little bit, they're the only zoo on record for successfully breeding the northern white rhinoceros, with the most recent calf being born in the year 2000. So this is where Sudan was sent to in 1975. Later, he was joined by another named Nasima, who was from Uganda. Saut, one of the original captured white rhinos, was sent to the San Diego Zoo in the United States. Just 5 years after Sudan's capture, the northern white rhinos were completely wiped out in Uganda and Sudan. The Northern White Rhino story is extremely heartbreaking. In the 1960s, their population was at about 2,000 individuals, and by 2008, they were declared functionally extinct in the wild. That's absolutely insane. 2,000 individuals to basically extinct in just the span of 48 years. The primary reason for this was poaching for their horns. If you didn't know, rhino horns are extremely valuable, especially for Chinese traditional medicine. And to make things worse, a civil war broke out in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which made it near impossible to protect the rhinos that were remaining from poachers and other threats. And then lastly, habitat loss made it impossible for isolated populations to travel between each other and created this isolation and inbreeding that we'll also talk about moving forward. By 1980, just 5 years after Sudan's capture, all northern white rhinos were wiped out in Sudan and Uganda, and 13 were left in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which at the time was called Zaire. In 1986, conservation breeding specialists of the IUCN met to try to save the species. Their main strategy was to bring all the northern white rhinos around the world back together. So they brought Ben from London, Sout from San Diego, and they tried to join them with the southern white rhinos and found only mixed success in those efforts. Sudan himself fathered 3 calves in the Czech Republic and even had 1 grandbaby as well. The mother was Nasima, who we mentioned earlier. He fathered Nabir in 1983, but she died in 2015, just recently 10 years ago. Najin in 1989, and another who died prematurely. Najin had a daughter though named Fatu, and unfortunately she's infertile. Many northern white rhinos had this issue of infertility due to inbreeding and loss of genetic diversity, like I mentioned before. This makes natural pregnancy impossible, but there's still hope to save the species, which we'll get into in a bit. Before Sudan, there was another male northern white rhinoceros named Angalifu, and he also lived in the San Diego Zoo. Unfortunately, by this time, Angalifu was too old to breed, leaving Sudan the only fertile male in the world. So in the face of this disaster, the IUCN African Rhino Specialist Group, the World Zoo and Aquarium Association, as well as the Berlin Institute, experts from Vienna Veterinary Institute, and the European Zoo and Aquarium Association all came together to discuss the crisis once again. Their conclusion, they needed to move Sudan and the other northern white rhinos back to Africa. This was obviously met with some heavy objections, as many European scientists felt that they were uniquely equipped to save the species. But for many, this actually made sense. Moving the northern white rhinos back to Africa was crucial. That is where they belong, and they needed to move them back to properly secure a stronghold against extinction in the wild. They needed to be restored to their ecological roles back home. So the idea was to save the species long-term, not short-term, and keeping them in the Czech Republic would only be a band-aid on the de-extinction process. So in December of 2009, the rhinos were moved back to Ol Pejeta Conservancy in Kenya. But as we mentioned before, these rhinos had experienced genetic bottlenecking, which caused breeding to be impossible. And this actually led to breeding efforts in Kenya to also fail. And then the last nail in the coffin happened in 2017 when Sudan suffered from an infection to his back right leg. They rushed to save him, and while he was able to hold off the infection for a little while, it eventually came back just months later, and he died on March 19th, 2018, after they had to euthanize him. All right, so some of you may be wondering, that's it? All of that story just for the species to go extinct in the end? Where's the happy ending? And how does this qualify as mythic status? Why is this in the Mythic Wilds podcast? I'll answer the second question first. Mythic Wilds is going to be broad. I want to talk about ancient mythological creatures as well as more recent folklore creatures, and then finally modern day legends. Sudan, for example, represents a modern day legend that will be remembered either as the end of hope for the northern white rhinoceros or the beginning of its saving. As for the end of hope, hope is actually not lost. In 2015, the Ol Pejeta Conservancy launched a GoFundMe to raise funds for rangers guarding the remaining northern white rhinos. Because remember, Sudan was the last male rhino. There's still several females out there. Also in 2015, Pakistani entrepreneurs Hamad Hussein and Muhammad Yaqub started a global campaign to bring awareness of possible IVF solutions to save the northern white rhinoceros. To do this, they brought celebrities out to the conservancy to be able to spread the word that these amazing creatures needed saving. And then in 2017, Ol Pejeta Conservancy teamed up with Tinder to actually launch a campaign to save the species. Sudan was given his own Tinder account and profile, and the app's users could swipe right to make donations for the development of IVF breeding technology. That's pretty creative, to be honest. There's thousands of people on that platform, and it really brought awareness to the Northern White Rhinoceros's plight. Before Sudan's passing, they actually froze his semen, meaning that he could very well be part of the story of success moving forward into the future. So many of today's Earth species are on the brink of extinction. Many scientists believe that we are currently living in a 6th mass extinction event. They call it the Anthropocene extinction, meaning that it's primarily driven by us, humans, and our activities. We are destroying our planet through habitat loss, pollution, and driving climate change. The current biodiversity loss on our planet is serious, and the question remains, what species will soon follow the Northern White Rhinoceros? And can we save it as well? There's a few ways that you can help the Northern White Rhinoceros moving forward. First, you can donate using the GoFundMe that I mentioned earlier. I'll link that in the description, and you can also donate to the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance or International Rhino Foundation as well. Links to all of these will be in the description below. But I want to hear from you, the listener. What do you think about Sudan, the last Northern White Rhino? Can we save the species? And what solutions do you think could possibly work? Again, thank you guys so much for listening to this podcast. I know this is a shorter one today, but make sure you leave a comment or join us over on Patreon and Discord for more in-depth discussion. Again, we have episodes 2 times a month, every other week, so make sure you don't miss anything. Please leave a review on the podcast, especially if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss anything. And again, make sure you join Patreon or Discord to submit your own theories or questions that may be featured here on the podcast itself. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history and folklore. If you enjoyed this episode of Mythic Wilds, be sure to subscribe for more tales of legendary creatures, untamed lands, and the mysteries that still roam among us. Until next time, stay curious, stay wild.